Good morning, everybody. And first of all, thank you to the LSI team for inviting us to talk about a topic that I think this group are all fairly excited to discuss. So we'll kick off with a short round of introductions. I'm Kim High. I'm British, as you can probably tell. I'm a venture partner for NLC Health Ventures. So we build new companies around promising technologies, and I lead our ortho spine portfolio. I'll hand over to Adam.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Adam Wollowick. I lead mergers and acquisitions, business development for Stryker's trauma and extremities business. I've been with Stryker for 10 and a half years, spent a lot of that time in our spine and enabling technologies business before pivoting over to the trauma and extremity space.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. It's Christopher Campbell. I lead our platform strategy and digital surgery for J&J on the ortho side. I'm an engineer by training. I've had my own business. I've worked for mid-cap companies and then with J&J. So it's great to be here. Thanks for all the innovators and entrepreneurs here. Excited for all the innovation you guys are driving.
Hi, my name is Tomir Kosowski. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Altach Biomedical based in Dublin, Ireland. And we're developing a truly biomimetic scaffold for the repair of osteochondral defects. The company was founded 2 years ago, and I'm very grateful to be here today.
Thanks. My name is Brian Hess. I'm the CEO and founder of RevBio. I've been in the orthopedic industry for over 20 years. I've worked at Stryker, and then I founded my own company. We're developing a novel bone adhesive. It's regenerative for many different indications. We're in the clinic, and I'm really appreciative to be on this panel representing the startups in this orthopedic space.
All right, so let's kick it off. The title, as you'll have noticed, was probably a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because quite frankly, you can't really talk about innovation in orthopedics and just completely ignore robotics, given the constant discussion about clinical versus commercial focus and the growth of enabling tech. That said, the landscape keeps on shifting, Chris, and as an expert in this particular space, I see we have Stuart in the audience here, and we're seeing a bit of a shift there with platforms moving from closed to open. So I'm going to throw you a slight tough question to kick us off and loosen things up a little bit. If we were to see an acquisition of a company like Think, what do you think that impact would be on the broader landscape?
I think Stuart would be very happy. No, I think companies like Think and others, are leading the way in changing how we think about transactions in the digital space in orthopedics. Robotics, as the evolution of Mako and other technologies have really changed how we think about delivering precision in orthopedics. I think that some of the other waves that are coming is, reduction in size of how we deliver it, but also the transactions. So things like open platform, changing the dialogue on how we have those conversations with hospitals and surgeons. I think we're going to continue to innovate, not just open versus closed, but how we think about software, how we monetize those, and how we deliver those to customers. I think it's exciting times.
And so, as we see the clinical data come out to support the use of robotics, which has been a big question previously, but is starting to improve now, you talk there about innovation, not just in open versus closed, but what do you see the future of robotics in orthopedics looking like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll be wrong about the future, but my thoughts on the future, I think we're going to continue to see the effort to bring the size of robotic formats down. So the desire for surgeons to have the precision of robotics in a smaller form factor, I think is just going to persist. And how that looks is going to look different ways, but they increasingly don't want the size of a robotic arm. They want a different form factor. I think that's one area. I think advanced tracking technologies, optical tracking, has done a great job. It's served us well. I think some of the innovation of AI and some of the advanced vision systems that we're seeing, I think will open the doors for different ways and more minimally invasive ways to approach. And then I think the curation of big data sets will enable us to bring real-time planning right into the operating theater so surgeons can make personalized decisions for the patients. And so I think over the next decade, continue to be evolution, but almost a Gen 2 of a robotics platform.
Okay, and so you talk about data sets there and the perioperative space, but thinking just about digital more broadly, and then I'll switch gear a little bit. How do we get away from the hype and think about something that's really going to make a step change in orthopedics specifically?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about that a lot too, right? There's a lot of great technology. Many of you are innovating around those. But how do you make that impact? I think a couple things. I think one is you keeping the problem center in view. Like there's lots of problems to solve, but those one or two big problems you're trying to solve got to be super focused. We have to do good science. The technology has to be sound. It has to be robust. And then I think having that beachhead indication, all digital technology by and large are platformable, but you can very easily get distracted by going everywhere, so you go nowhere. And so having that hyper focus of the first application where that really make a big impact, and then having an evergreen technology. The great thing about digital is you can quickly iterate on it pretty quickly. So I think that's how you avoid the hype. Keep the focus on the problem, focus on the science, keep that beachhead, and then develop evergreen approaches to keep it real.
Interesting. And then one point that you mentioned just in the last question that I want to pick up on with you, Adam, if you don't mind, is you mentioned personalization. And I think that is a nice link with smart implants, particularly in orthopedics. Again, there's a lot of noise about smart implants, sensors within implants. But we have seen some companies come to market and build partnerships and then struggle with actually shifting market share as a result of that. So what do you think, first of all, is there merit in smart implants, number one? And number two, from that, what do we need to see for them to really, again, shift gears?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think we're kind of at the tip of the iceberg, right, in terms of smart implants, right? I think we can collect a lot of data. We don't always know what that data means. I think Canary is doing a really nice job in their partnership with Zimmer on starting to bring this out to the masses, if you will. But at the same time, again, I don't think we fully know what it all means, right? Again, they're collecting tons and tons, literally millions of data points on almost a daily basis on the patients. But how does that change the care paradigm, right? How do you actually take that data and translate it into something actionable that can change the care continuum for that patient? Can it lead to earlier interventions or different interventions? And we frankly don't know. So I think there's a lot of effort to collect the data, but it will take time to amalgamate it and figure out what it means. And I think until we have clinical outcomes that result from all this data, I don't know that you're going to see massive market adoption, right? You're taking it on faith right now that it matters.
Yeah, I think if I could add one thing, I do think patients are the kind of the wild card in ortho, and rightly so. We focus on surgeons and we focus on hospital systems, and we should. But patients help change the market. Like we look at robotics, it's increasing patients' demand. They want that precision, even if they don't fully understand how it works. And I think there's some of the wild card, even with data and sensors. I think patients are going to start to demand new things of us as the industry, but also of clinicians, of how we deliver that care. Even natural or biologics, I think patients are waking up to the fact that they want their own body to help in that healing process in the biomechanics. So anyway, I do think when I think about changing market dynamics and even sensors, it's patients are wild cards, and they make huge impacts in the market.
Yeah, I think that's a good point on patients, and something that maybe is overlooked by early stage companies, that patients or even potentially your investors. We had great success with a crowdfunding campaign, which was based in Ireland, primarily on a group of non-specialty investors.
That's cool.
But if you have a message or if you're solving a problem that sort of resonates with people without even delving deep into the science, they're willing to put their own money into a problem they believe needs to be solved, one they can identify with. So in our case, knee osteoarthritis, everyone knows what a joint replacement is, everyone knows the consequences, and they were willing to invest money at a very early stage in the company. So I think moving forwards, patients not only are a potential future end goal, but they can also even be involved in your fundraising strategy very early on.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about that. Until now, we've really considered the surgeon and not so much the patient in the impact of that innovation. So just before we step into what the patient's really looking for, Adam, your background as a surgeon, I think, is helpful here. Can you help us understand how orthopedic surgeons think and how, until now, that has shaped the industry and the way that we innovate?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's a great question. So yeah, I'm a former orthopedic surgeon, practiced for 7 years. After all my training, I was focused on spine. I think orthopedic surgeons are interesting kind of creatures, right? And, I guess I can say that since I am one. But I think on the one hand, orthopedic surgeons like to believe that they're innovative, right? They want to portray themselves as innovative. And I think many of them are. They're certainly early adopters across all subspecialty areas. But at the same time, I think we've also seen that they're relatively slow adopters in general, right? So you look at things like navigation in spine surgery, you look at the current state of robotics, where it's certainly increasing. You're seeing critical mass, and yet the majority of cases are not being done with robotics or navigation. It's taken 15 to 20 years to get spine navigation where it is. So I think it comes down to having persuasive clinical data, being cost effective, because I think even though orthopedists like their toys and their tools, they are seeing and feeling the need to be cost conscious and to bring value. But at the same time, they want to be efficient, they want to be fast, they have high volume, and so you can't slow them down with the innovation, right? If you're going to add an hour to a case, then that's a problem. So I think it has to be slick and smooth, but also have the right data.
So if we, like I say, then think about the patient and what the patient's looking for, and also we kind of recognize that there's solutions that are missing still. Orthopedics are particular creatures. So that said, particularly in large joints, they're widely known to be one of the most successful operations that are undertaken. So Tomir, I'm going to throw this one to you. I like the phrase that the biggest room is the room for improvement. What do you see as the room for improvement in orthopedic implants?
I think, focusing specifically on the area we deal with, so knee osteoarthritis, I think, as you said, joint replacements obviously are a very successful surgery, but they do impact your quality of life. And I think going back to, what patients want, a 50, 60-year-old patient today is a very different patient to 20 years ago. And they have very different expectations for quality of life and what they can do. And I think technologies that allow patients to have that quality of life, which are minimally invasive, which utilize the body's own ability to heal, so various forms of biologics, and things that sort of slot into that continuum of care. So when you're beginning to have knee osteoarthritis, to have solutions that can sort of delay that onset as we progress. Of course, ultimately, many will end up with a joint replacement, but if you can push that down the line for 20 years, I think that's a successful result, and that's what patients want. So that's the areas we're working on, I think, and that's where the progress is going, is in novel biomaterials, and harnessing the body's ability to heal, and everything in a minimally invasive fashion that will allow you to spend less time in surgery, which also benefits surgeons, quicker procedures, and that's where I think things are heading currently.
I love that point about harnessing the body's power. If you think about orthopedics traditionally, it's a hammer and chisel specialty, broadly speaking, and thinking about how we really bring orthopedics out of the dark ages and stop thinking about the musculoskeletal system as just a frame. Brian, what are your thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, picking up on your point, in personalized medicine, patients do want more natural implants. They want to maintain their mobility. They want products that will get them back to their jobs, back out playing sports, whatever. And so trying to get out of the dark ages, we're thinking about biomimetic implants, right? Implants that have properties that mimic the tissues that they're being replaced. So bone or soft tissue. When you're thinking about all the great companies out there, they're really thinking more sophisticated about the design of the implants, being patient specific, perhaps harnessing technologies like 3D printing, using patient-specific scans to develop implants that have the right form factor, whether it's minimally invasive procedures or implants that come to the operating room that essentially plug and play into the patient, and it restores their natural anatomy. This is how we're going to move out of the dark ages and actually advance patient care. And then we can do these clinical studies that you talk about where we can show the effect. If we show the effect, that'll lead through the whole chain with regulatory approvals, but ultimately reimbursement and adoption. So I think of a really exciting future that's happening now with companies here and in the future as we think about regenerative technologies to help rebuild the patient's body to be where it really is supposed to be.
Okay, so we're shifting into regenerative technologies, and we have an aging population and a declining birth rate. We have patients that are 50 and 60 that look different than they did 20 years ago and that want different things. And we need to find solutions for them. And then if we look at biologics and regenerative technologies, they're tough markets. They are tough development cycles. And ultimately, the two of you know very well, it's all well and good to want to build something exciting, but you have to build for the market. So, Brian, thinking about the work that you're doing and your point there on clinical data, how do you navigate the current need for clinical data? Because strategics are looking for commercial traction, and to get to that point is an awful lot harder than it was once. And then again, once you throw in biologics or regenerative medicine to the mix.
Well, it's necessary. I mean, so you have to embrace it. So early on, we talked to a lot of clinicians. Obviously, we have a platform technology. We can apply our material throughout the body to help regenerate different types or regions of bone. But that means we're going to have to generate the clinical data, right? And so thinking about clinical outcomes and designing these studies, not just for regulatory approval, but obviously long-term for adoption. And so I think it's really important to embrace it and then turn it into a marketing strategy, right? So we have to set up sites all around the country and the world, depending on the markets that you're going after. And it's really important to do that because now you've got clinicians using your product during the studies. This will then lead to hopefully publishable data that these clinicians will go around and talk about. They'll go to different conferences. They'll share it with their peers, and it'll bring awareness to such materials like this. So I think all the clinical data is going to be helping companies differentiate their products and put it on the radar, especially for potential acquirers down the road. And so I think you have to embrace it, and it's just a necessary part of not only regulatory, but it really is your marketing strategy. And then your go-to-market strategy is really set up because you have an installed base. You have an installed base of users that have been using your product already.
And Tomir, kind of following on from that, as you're building out your regulatory and your reimbursement strategy and the complexity that Brian's just talked about, how do you build that into your funding strategy? Because it's not just timely, but it's expensive too, right?
Yeah, that's true. And ultimately, your regulatory strategy really defines the way you fundraise and build the company, because these milestones, these trials, these endpoints, which you agree with the FDA or anything, are ultimately what build value for the company as you move forward. But it's risky in the sense it's a one-way street. You usually only get one shot at these sort of things, and this is what makes it difficult for a very early stage company as ourselves when you're raising capital. Is you're looking at an extremely long runway. And a risky one, which does pose its challenges from a point of raising funds, where you're very early and sometimes you're outside of that window that people are looking for returns. And so that's when you look at alternative options such as crowdfunding or angel syndicates. And also the regulatory, I think it has a big impact on your strategy, and these things can change. So coming from Europe, with the MDR changes in recent years, it used to be a given thing for our type of products that, you do your CE mark first, build clinical data, raise some money, and go to the US. Now, as a company at any stage, when you're looking at the maths now and the data required to do the MDR, the problems with the notified bodies where you're stuck waiting 2 years for an audit, a lot of companies are shifting gears and saying, okay, if we're going to do this once and we do it properly, let's focus on the US. And we're seeing that more and more where companies are making the choice to go US instead of EU, which I think, is an unintended consequence of the MDR. But these things do impact your strategy, and you have to make the decisions.
So on that, Chris and Adam, I'm going to kind of switch to you. And Chris, first of all, what do you see as the external factors that are going to shift again to influence some of that? Because Tomir just mentioned MDR, and speaking as a Brit, it's eternally frustrating that we are having to pursue FDA and we're going to be slowed down with market access right the way across Europe. But what are some of the external factors that you see, not just in the regulatory landscape, but also in the cost of some of these regenerative materials? You think about stem cell production right now; it's hugely expensive, but offers massive opportunity. Can you see some things that might happen, some things that are nearer, some things that are further, that will help with bringing some of these technologies to market? And then the second bit to that is bring them to market across the globe and not just in the US.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think that the opportunity of biologic implants bringing a patient's body along the healing journey with the implants super important and super exciting. I do think the pricing of the challenge, right? There is, whether you're in the US or OUS, there isn't a huge amount of increased money coming from governments or insurance. And so I think the challenge has to navigate. I think some things that could change, I think, robotics or digital surgery is helping, right? It makes surgery less invasive. It adds precision to the procedure that opens the door to some of the precision requirements or techniques that are used for the biological implants. So I think that's a big factor. I do think that either going to be through the data that's collected and the evidence, change in reimbursement. So you're going to have to more reimbursement from the government because they see the patient impact. You don't have to do surgery, say, for another 20 years. That's a benefit. Or I think also at the same time, supply costs have to come down. And that's a combination, not just in pure manufacturing, but release testing, all the regulatory requirements. We want products safe and effective. We also probably need to be a bit more efficient on the regulatory side of what it takes to get those products on the market.
And I would just say real quick, if you want to generate the evidence, thinking about those outcomes just to, reduce hospital stays, try to, avoid complications. These are all benefits that'll help your cost structure and show value in your product, right? So yeah, these materials may cost more, but on the other hand, maybe you have an opportunity to really show a difference in the patient care, and then that'll sort of work its way through in the market dynamics.
I think it's important because you have to actually be collecting that economic data right from the get-go. And it's about showing value, not just improved outcomes that justify that cost. Because as you said, throughout the entire episode of care, you'll see perhaps the returns on that early investment, right? And so, but it's critical that founders and young companies are thinking about that right from the get-go, not just getting more clinical data and enrolling more patients in the trial.
Yes, absolutely. It's your point of OUS. I do think for the differentiated technologies are leading the way. Government support's super important, right? If you look at the growth of robotics, say in China as an example, a lot of that's because the government's really leaning in to help grow that in the Chinese market. And so I think as we go OUS and to different markets around the world, having that partnership with the regulatory bodies and the insurance agencies is super important to see these new technologies, take root in the market.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Adam and Chris, I'll ask the two of you to kind of close up with that on your mind. For the innovators in the room, thinking as a strategic acquirer, what's some of the advice that you would give people navigating some of these longer term trends, but the ones that are really promising for the future? What's the advice you would give to them? Adam, first off.
Sure. I mean, great question. Look, I think orthopedics is ripe for innovation. There's been tremendous strides made over the last, pick your number, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but there's so much more that we can do. And I think young companies, founders, and entrepreneurs need to be pushing those boundaries, right? I think that a lot of the focus, even with the strides that we've made, is on doing the same procedures better. We need better procedures, right? We need to do things differently than how we've been doing them. In some sense, right, we're still fusing spines, which is a very interesting sort of paradigm, right? If you really take a step back and think about it. On the other hand, we know that collecting the amount of data, doing clinical trials is expensive. And these types of innovative products, enabling technologies, advanced biomaterials are expensive and don't always have great margins. So from the acquirer's perspective, we look to see that not only is the technology sound and frequently already gone through the approval process, but then is also further de-risked so for early commercial traction. And so that creates sort of an innovator's dilemma, right? How do I get in and talk to a Stryker or a J&J?
You don't need to talk to Stryker. That's okay.
When it's such a long and expensive road. And to me, I think the best advice is stick with it, right? It takes fortitude. It takes persistence. And I think if you're solving true clinical problems and meeting unmet clinical needs and delivering value, as we've been talking about, the investors will be interested. They are going to fund good technologies that meet those sort of criteria. And then the strategics also at the back end of it are going to be interested in acquiring those so we could bring great technologies to more patients throughout the globe. So I think stick with it.
Yeah. I think my perspective first is just you're all working extremely hard. The innovators in this room, from my perspective as strategic, you got their heroes driving innovation, leading the way. It's hard. Have my own company, it's difficult. It's difficult to get through those days, funding the challenge, capture the challenge. So I echo Adam's comment of not only stick with it, but you're driving the future of medtech is in all the startups that are here. As strategic, I think one of the roles we play is to scale and integrate and bring it to broader mass. But a lot of the core innovations that you're driving. When I think about advice, I would say having that clear story of focusing what are that one or two problems and how best can you solve it. It's really difficult challenges, but the story is the same, and consistent storytelling is really important as a strategic wants to hear. What's that clear story that we can understand and we can see a vision how to bring it forward. When I think about the future, I do think understanding how can you generate data and intelligence in orthopedics, this would be a big theme moving forward. And then how can you integrate into the digital ecosystem of technology? And then like we were talking before about open system and think and other technologies that are changing transaction discussions, you can be a part of that as well. We're reshaping how we go to market in the orthopedic space, and a lot of that comes from the technologies introducing new ideas and new ways to transact.
I was just going to say it's also exciting because last week at AAOS, AvaMed sponsored a meeting, and it was the Orthopedics Working Group, and it was a CEO roundtable led by executives from Stryker and Smith and Nephew and Zimmer, J&J, and then also startups that were in the space. And they said, "What's one common theme we can all work on?" And the idea was let's bring awareness to musculoskeletal disease. Right? Like we think about orthopedics, it's fractionated, right? You got arms, you got legs, you got the head, right? All over the place, the spine. But like other diseases, they've put campaigns around it, right? Like let's bring awareness to musculoskeletal health. And maybe that will drive awareness to investors. So I think that was like a great message coming out of that meeting, and is very encouraging, especially as a startup, as we're trying to think about like the challenges of fundraising.
So I guess we'll finish up on that point, which is ultimately a call to action. There's a bunch of innovators in the room, hopefully some investors and strategics too. And ultimately, we have a big opportunity in orthopedics to shift the way that we do things and think about our delivery of care in a completely different way than we have for a long time. And so the call to action is for those three groups to really come together much more and much earlier so that we can drive some real change. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.